March 1895. A stone mason stands on Fifth Avenue looking up at what he's building. 50 feet of Indiana limestone rising toward the sky. Behind him, 3 more palaces are under construction. Across the street, 2 more. In 5 years, nearly all of them will be gone. Not from what you'd expect. Before we continue, consider what you're about to witness. This isn't just about buildings. This is about how America devours its own monuments, how the very systems that created unimaginable wealth became the mechanism for its destruction. If this story makes you see your own city differently, if it makes you question what we choose to keep and what we're so eager to destroy, then click the like button and subscribe to the channel. I'm checking in with everyone here. Tell me your location and the time you're seeing this. Now let's proceed with the documentary. Fifth Avenue between 50th and 96th Streets in the 1890s is not a street. It's a declaration of war against European aristocracy. The Vanderbilts build first. William Henry Vanderbilt erects twin mansions at 51st Street, spending $3 million. That's roughly $90 million in today's money. For 2 houses. His children see this and think it inadequate. They build bigger. Cornelius Vanderbilt II commissions Richard Morris Hunt to create a French chateau at 57th Street. 130 rooms. A medieval great hall that could swallow most American homes whole. Alva Vanderbilt, married to William Kissam Vanderbilt, demands her own palace at 52nd Street. She gets it. Limestone, marble, a ballroom designed specifically to force New York society to acknowledge her existence. The Astors watch this with aristocratic disdain. They've been wealthy longer. Their mansion at 65th Street makes a quieter statement, but it's there. The loudest whisper on the avenue. Caroline Astor, the Mrs. Astor, holds court in a ballroom that fits exactly 400 people. If you're not one of the 400, you don't exist in her New York. Andrew Carnegie builds at 91st Street. 64 rooms seem almost modest by comparison, but the mansion stretches an entire block. Henry Clay Frick starts planning his palace at 70th Street. It will take years to complete. But Frick already knows what he wants. Something permanent. Something that will outlast him. The avenue becomes a construction site of ambition. European craftsmen arrive by the shipload. Stone carvers from Italy, woodworkers from France, plasterers from England. They're building with techniques unchanged since the Renaissance. Hand-carved details, gilded ceilings, floors laid with rare woods harvested from 3 continents. Each mansion is a university education in craft, thousands of hours of human skill frozen into walls and ceilings. The architects compete as fiercely as their clients. Richard Morris Hunt, Stanford White, Carrere, and Hud, Hastings. They're importing entire rooms from European palaces, then building American shells around them. It's not enough to be rich. You must appear to have been rich for centuries, to have inherited taste along with your fortune. Walk the avenue in 1898, and you're walking through America's argument with history. These families made their money in railroads, steel, banking, shipping, brutally, ruthlessly, within a single lifetime. But the mansions speak a different language. They speak of permanence, of dynasty, of wealth so established it no longer needs to justify itself. The neighborhood transforms completely. Where modest brownstones stood 5 years earlier, palaces now rise. The scale is European, but the speed is purely American. What took centuries to build in Paris or London takes a decade in New York. Money moves faster here, ambition burns hotter, and the future arrives, whether you're ready or not. The Vanderbilt Triple Palace occupies the entire block between 51st and 52nd Streets. Not one mansion. 3. Connected. William Henry Vanderbilt in the center, his 2 daughters flanking him on either side. The combined structure contains 660 rooms. The White House has 132. Think about that. Inside William Henry's section, the picture gallery stretches 75 feet long. The walls hold paintings by European masters purchased wholesale. Rembrandt, Meissonier, Bouguereau. Not because Vanderbilt particularly understands them, but because owning them means something. The ceiling is carved walnut, every inch of it. The floor is inlaid with patterns that take craftsmen 8 months to complete. Cornelius Vanderbilt II goes further. His chateau at 57th Street copies the Chateau de Blois from the Loire Valley, then improves upon it. The Great Hall rises 3 stories, modeled after a medieval banquet hall, but with modern heating. Massive stone fireplaces anchor each end. The limestone exterior required 250 men working for 3 years straight. The interior took longer. Alva Vanderbilt's ballroom at 52nd Street becomes legendary for one event, March 1883. She throws a costume ball, 1,200 guests. The New York Times devotes multiple pages to describing the costumes alone. Alva dresses as a Venetian princess. Her sister-in-law comes as Electric Light, wearing a white satin gown studded with batteries powering small bulbs. This is wealth as performance art. The Astor Mansion operates on different principles. Caroline Astor doesn't need to shout. Her ballroom is smaller, deliberately. 400 guests exactly. That's the capacity. She determines who matters in New York by who fits in that room. The walls are crimson silk. The ceiling is carved and gilded. But the real luxury is exclusion. Being denied entry means more than the decor inside. Henry Clay Frick approaches his mansion as a museum from the start. He's buying art seriously. Vermeer, Rembrandt, Velázquez. Not just names, but masterpieces. His architects, Carrere and Hastings, design galleries disguised as living spaces. The bowling alley in the basement is an afterthought. The paintings are the point. Frick intends this place to survive him. He's already planning its conversion to a public institution in his will. Andrew Carnegie's mansion at 91st Street represents different priorities. 64 rooms include a massive pipe organ. Carnegie loves music genuinely. The organ has 7,000 pipes, making it one of the largest private instruments in America. The mansion also features the first residential elevator powered by a central generating station, the first structural steel frame in a New York residence, and fireproofing throughout. Carnegie made his fortune in steel. He trusts steel. The details in these houses exceed reason. Woodwork carved by hand takes 5 years in some rooms. Marble imported from Italian quarries arrives pre-cut to specification, then requires another year of fitting and polishing on site. Ceiling paintings are commissioned from European artists who travel to New York specifically for these projects. One ballroom ceiling takes a team of Italian fresco painters 11 months to complete. The servant quarters tell their own story. Most mansions include entire floors devoted to staff housing. The Vanderbilt Chateau has separate staircases for servants, allowing them to move through the house invisibly. Bells in every room connect to a panel in the service areas. Technology serves hierarchy. The basement kitchens are industrial in scale. Preparing a dinner for 60 guests is routine. The staff to manage this might number 40 people just for a single evening. But here's what matters most about these structures. They're not American buildings. Not really. They're European fantasies constructed with American speed and American money. Every detail speaks to somewhere else, some older model of how power should look. The architects raid history books, French Renaissance here, Italian Baroque there, English Tudor when appropriate. It's as if America's wealthiest can't imagine their own architectural language for success. The cost? William Vanderbilt's Triple Palace runs $3 million in construction. Cornelius spends another $3 million on his chateau. These numbers don't include furnishings, art, ongoing maintenance, or staff salaries. In modern dollars, each mansion represents over $100 million in initial investment. And Fifth Avenue fills with dozens of them within 20 years. They're building for centuries, or so they believe. February 3rd, 1913. The 16th Amendment to the Constitution is ratified. The federal government can now tax income directly. Most of the Fifth Avenue families barely notice. The initial rate is 7% on income over $500,000. Pocket change for people spending millions on houses. They should have paid attention. Before 1913, the federal government operated primarily on tariffs and excise taxes. The wealthy avoided most of this. They consumed imported goods, sure, but their actual income remained untouched. A Vanderbilt could make $10 million in a year and hand over nothing to Washington. Property taxes existed at the state and local level, but these were manageable. The mansions were expensive to maintain, but the families could afford it easily. The income tax changes the mathematics of wealth. Not immediately, not obviously, but it starts. 1916. The top rate jumps to 15% to fund military preparedness. Then America enters World War I. By 1918, the top marginal rate hits 77%. This is not a gradual increase. This is a revolution in taxation happening in 5 years. Someone making $5 million annually now owes the government nearly $4 million. The amount kept is barely more than the amount surrendered. The Fifth Avenue families are not broke, not even close. But the equation shifts. Maintaining a mansion with 100 rooms and 60 servants costs roughly $100,000 annually. That's operating costs alone, staff salaries, heating bills for spaces larger than most hotels, maintenance on buildings that require constant attention. In 1900, this was manageable. By 1920, it's different. Consider the math. A family needs to generate $600,000 in pre-tax income just to clear $100,000 after taxes for mansion upkeep. And that's not counting their other expenses, their lifestyle, their charitable obligations. The mansions become anchors, beautiful, prestigious anchors dragging fortunes underwater. Some families try to adapt. They close off wings of their houses. The Vanderbilt Chateau stops heating the upper floors entirely. Servants are dismissed. 20 staff members become 10, then 5. But you can't half maintain a palace. Either the whole thing works, or it doesn't. Closing a wing doesn't mean it stops decaying. It just means the decay happens unwatched. The property taxes increase too. New York City needs revenue. The war is expensive. The mansions are assessed at higher values. What cost $5,000 annually in property taxes in 1900 cost $20,000 by 1920. Combined with income taxes, the squeeze becomes real. 1921. Congress lowers the top rate to 73%. It drops further through the decade, reaching 25% by 1929. The mansion owners breathe easier, but the damage is done. The war years proved something important. The government can take most of your income if it chooses. Investing millions in a house that generates no revenue starts looking foolish. Better to put money in bonds, in stocks, in income-producing real estate. The next generation learns the lesson even faster. The children who inherit these mansions in the 20s grew up watching their parents struggle with tax bills. They see the servants leaving for better jobs. They watch their families close off ballrooms that once hosted society. The houses stop being symbols of permanence and start being burdens. And there's another factor. Estate taxes. When the mansion owner dies, the estate owes taxes on the property's full assessed value. This forces heirs to liquidate assets just to keep the house. Some families manage it once. The second death becomes impossible. The mansion must be sold to pay the taxes on the mansion. The logic defeats itself. By the mid-1920s, several Fifth Avenue families are quietly calculating. The land under their houses is worth millions. The buildings themselves are worth almost nothing except as demolition projects. A rational person would sell, take the money, and move somewhere manageable. The problem is admitting defeat. These families built monuments to eternal wealth. Selling admits The wealth isn't eternal. Selling admits the experiment failed. Pride keeps the mansion standing a few more years. But pride doesn't pay tax bills. The mathematics of 1913 are slowly, inevitably, bringing down what took decades to build. A Fifth Avenue mansion in 1900 requires an army to function. Not a metaphor. An actual small army of human beings working in coordinated hierarchy. The Vanderbilt Chateau employs 80 servants on regular staff. For dinner parties, that number swells past 100. Each person has a specific role: butler, under-butler, first footman, second footman, lady's maid, cook, undercook, scullery maids, laundress, groom, chauffeur. The list continues. These aren't jobs anyone dreams about. They're what's available to immigrants and the working poor. You wake at 5 in the morning. You're in uniform by 5:30. Your day ends when the family no longer needs you, which might be midnight. You eat servant food in servant quarters. You use servant staircases. You're invisible when the family is present. That's the actual job requirement. Invisibility. The pay in 1900 is barely adequate. A housemaid makes $20 monthly plus room and board. A butler, the highest position, might make $60. These wages work because options are limited. Immigration from Europe is unrestricted. Millions arrive desperate for any employment. Domestic service is at least stable. You won't get rich, but you won't starve. Then the war happens. 1914 to 1918. American factories ramp up production for European allies. Suddenly, there are jobs that pay better and don't require bowing. A munitions factory offers women $40 weekly. That's more than double what a lady's maid earns monthly. You work set hours. You go home at night to your own room, your own life. You're not on call at someone's whim. The servants start leaving. First the young men, drawn to factory work or military service. Then the women, discovering they have options. The families try raising wages. A housemaid now makes $35 monthly. It's not enough. Freedom is worth more than money to people who've never had it. 1921. Congress passes the Emergency Quota Act. Immigration from Europe drops to a fraction of previous levels. The reserve pool of desperate people willing to work as servants dries up almost overnight. The families face a crisis they can't buy their way out of. There simply aren't enough people willing to do this work at any price they're willing to pay. Some mansions try operating with reduced staff, 20 servants instead of 60. This fails immediately. A 100-room house doesn't become cleaner because you wish it to. Dust accumulates, silver tarnishes, floors go unpolished. The families discover something uncomfortable. Their lifestyle requires subjugation of dozens of people. When those people refuse to be subjugated, the lifestyle collapses. The children of immigrants make different choices than their parents. A girl whose mother worked as a lady's maid becomes a secretary. She makes comparable money with normal hours and basic dignity. Her brother works construction rather than as a footman. The social stigma of domestic service grows stronger. It's not just the work itself, it's what the work represents. Subservience, a permanent underclass. Second-generation Americans reject this completely. By the mid-1920s, even families willing to pay premium wages struggle to find staff. Caroline Astor's mansion, once operated by 50 servants, makes do with 15. But 15 people cannot maintain a palace built for 50. Rooms stay closed. Dust covers furniture. The great ballroom that once hosted 400 sights dark most of the year. The families face an impossible choice: pay unsustainable wages for inadequate staff, or abandon the mansions entirely. Some try importing servants from abroad, but immigration restrictions make this difficult. Others attempt hiring agencies, paying premium fees for placement. Nothing works sustainably. The fundamental model is broken. Andrew Carnegie's mansion at 91st Street manages better than most because Carnegie pays well and treats staff with relative respect. But even there, positions go unfilled. The pipe organ falls silent. because the specialist who maintained it retired and no replacement exists. Complex houses need skilled labor. That labor is choosing other careers. Here's the reality these families won't admit publicly. The mansions were never sustainable without a desperate underclass willing to work for almost nothing. The system required poverty and limited options. When America's economy expanded and opportunities multiplied, the foundation crumbled. You can't build a palace on other people's desperation and expect it to stand when that desperation ends. By 1925, the servant problem is unsolvable. The mansions need people who no longer exist in sufficient numbers. The families built for a world that's already gone. July 25, 1916. New York City passes the first comprehensive zoning resolution in American history. The vote isn't close. The Board of Estimate approves it unanimously. Most Fifth Avenue mansion owners don't realize they've just signed their homes as death warrants. The law divides Manhattan into residential, commercial, and unrestricted districts. Fifth Avenue below 59th Street becomes commercial. Above 59th, it stays residential for now. But the principle is established. The city can rezone neighborhoods by legislative action. Property rights are not absolute. The public interest matters. Why does the city do this? Look at what's happening downtown. Factories and warehouses are pushing into residential areas. The garment district expands relentlessly. Wealthy residents complain about noise, traffic, and declining property values. They want protection. The zoning law gives it to them. But it gives them something else, too. Permission to transform their own neighborhoods when convenient. The immediate effect on Fifth Avenue is subtle. The mansions between 50th and 59th Streets now sit on commercially zoned land. They can't be torn down for commercial development yet because they're existing structures with rights. But the future becomes clear. When these mansions eventually sell, the buyer won't be another family. It'll be a developer. The math changes overnight. A mansion on residential land is worth what someone will pay for a house. Maybe $2 million, if you're lucky. That same mansion on commercial land is worth what the land can generate with a commercial building on it. Suddenly, it's worth $10 million, $15 million. The mansion itself becomes worthless except as something to demolish. Real estate developers start circling. They approach mansion owners with offers, usually rejected at first. But the offers keep coming, each one higher than the last. The developers know something the families are slowly learning. Holding commercial land with a residential building on it is leaving millions on the table every year. Consider a hypothetical. Your mansion costs $100,000 annually to operate. The land it sits on, if developed as an office building, could generate $500,000 yearly in rent. You're losing $400,000 in potential income every year you keep the house standing. After 5 years, that's $2 million in foregone profit. After 10 years, $4 million. The longer you wait, the more foolish it seems. Some families try to hold out by turning their mansions into something productive. A few become private clubs or professional offices. This rarely works. The buildings were designed for residential living, not commercial activity. The layouts are wrong. The room sizes are wrong. Adapting them costs nearly as much as building new, and tenants don't want to rent offices that feel like someone's home. The 1925 revision of the zoning law extends commercial zoning further up Fifth Avenue. Now most of the Mansion District falls under commercial designation. The holdouts realize they're fighting demographic reality. Retail stores are already marching up the avenue. Tiffany's, Bergdorf Goodman. Luxury shops that pay enormous rents for street-level space. The neighborhood is transforming whether the mansion owners participate or not. Property taxes accelerate the pressure. Commercial land is assessed at commercial rates. The families suddenly owe taxes based not on what their mansions are worth, but on what the land could generate commercially. A mansion that previously cost $5,000 yearly in property taxes now costs $30,000. The city is essentially taxing them for not developing. By the late 1920s, several mansion owners quietly consult with developers, not because they want to sell, because they need to understand their options. The conversations are always the same. The mansion is worth nothing. The land is worth everything. Demolition costs are minimal. A new building could rise in 18 months and start generating revenue immediately. The marble twins at 51st Street come down in 1926. William Vanderbilt's section of the Triple Palace, gone. Replaced by a commercial building that generates more income in 1 year than the mansion cost to operate in 20. Other families watch and calculate. The zoning revolution didn't destroy the mansions directly, it just made keeping them economically indefensible. Sometimes the most effective destruction is financial. The children don't want the houses. That's the simple truth nobody says aloud at first. Cornelius Vanderbilt III inherits his father's chateau in 1942. He takes one look at the 80 rooms and the impossible heating bills and wants nothing to do with it. He's not alone. This generation came of age during World War I. They drove ambulances in France. They saw modern life. They returned to Fifth Avenue and found their parents living like medieval lords in a world that had moved on. The contrast is unbearable. These young heirs want penthouses with central heating that actually works. They want modern plumbing. They want spaces designed for how people actually live in the 20th century. The mansions are uncomfortable in ways their parents tolerated, but their children won't. Drafty. Cold in winter despite massive heating systems. Hot in summer with no air conditioning. The rooms are too large for intimate conversation. The ceilings are too high for efficient heating. The layouts assume you have 40 servants managing your daily life. Without that staff, you're living in a museum where nothing works properly. Then comes the Depression. October 1929, the stock market collapses. Fortunes evaporate. But more importantly, the social acceptability of ostentatious wealth evaporates with them. Throwing lavish parties in a 100-room mansion while unemployment hits 25% looks obscene. The younger generation feels this acutely. Their parents built these houses to display power. That display now seems grotesque. The social calendar changes. The grand balls stop. Mrs. Astor's 400 becomes a relic of another era. Society itself fragments and democratizes. Cafe society emerges, centered on restaurants and nightclubs rather than private ballrooms. The young wealthy want to be seen as modern, sophisticated, democratic even. Living in a palace contradicts that image entirely. Some heirs simply abandon the mansions, not legally. They just stop living there. The houses sit empty except for a skeleton staff that shrinks yearly. Dust accumulates. Leaks go unrepaired. The families maintain legal ownership but invest nothing in upkeep. They're waiting for market conditions that make selling rational, or they're waiting for someone else in the family to make the decision. Harold Vanderbilt, inheriting a portion of the family's Fifth Avenue holdings, becomes a championship yacht racer instead of a mansion keeper. His priorities are clear. The houses are his past. Sport and modernity are his future. He's not sentimental about limestone and marble. That was his grandfather's obsession, not his. The younger Astors face similar ambivalence. The mansion at 65th Street feels like a mausoleum. The new generation remembers childhood there as cold and formal. They associate the house with rigid social rules they're eager to escape. When given the choice between maintaining tradition and living comfortably, they choose comfort. Even among those who might want to keep the houses, practical reality intrudes. A young couple in 1935 cannot staff a mansion properly. They cannot heat it adequately. They cannot maintain the grounds. They cannot afford the property taxes on their reduced Depression-era income. The economics are impossible. Sentiment loses to mathematics. The houses also represent social attitudes the younger generation rejects. These mansions were built to separate the wealthy from everyone else. Massive walls, private courtyards, architecture designed for exclusion. But this generation fought in a world war. They saw what excessive nationalism and class division produced. Many returned skeptical of the very hierarchies their homes embody. By the late 1930s, the pattern is clear. Almost no heir under 40 wants to live in their family's Fifth Avenue mansion. They'll take the money from selling it. They'll take a trust fund generated by commercial development of the land, but they won't take the house itself. The mansions become white elephants passed reluctantly through generations, each one looking for an honorable way to be rid of the burden. The social shift is complete. What parents built as eternal monuments, children view as expensive embarrassments. The architecture of aristocracy meets the values of a generation that no longer believes in American aristocracy. The mansions lose, not to wrecking balls, but to indifference from the only people who could save them. January 1926. The wrecking crew arrives at the Marble Twins on 5th Avenue and 51st Street. These are the two William Henry Vanderbilt mansions, the ones that started it all back in the 1880s. 45 years old. That's all they lasted. The workers begin dismantling what took 3 years to build. The demolition takes 4 months. Limestone blocks are salvaged and sold. Marble mantles go to dealers. Bronze fixtures are melted down. The carved woodwork that took Italian craftsmen years to complete is destroyed in days. None of it has value as architecture. It only has value as raw material. The wrecking company makes more profit from salvage than from the demolition contract itself. A commercial building replaces the mansions by late 1927. The developer leases the ground floor to retail. The upper floors become offices. The building generates $300,000 annually in rental income. The Vanderbilt mansions generated nothing except expenses. The logic of capital is perfect and brutal. The A.T. Stewart Mansion at 34th Street and 5th Avenue comes down in 1929. Stewart died in 1876 and his widow lived there until 1912. The house sat mostly empty for 17 years after that. Nobody wanted it. Too old-fashioned even by 1912 standards. The wrecking takes 2 months. A department store takes its place. The Cornelius Vanderbilt Chateau at 57th Street survives longer than most, but its death is inevitable. The family tries selling it as a single property in the early 1920s. No buyers. They try converting it to apartments. The cost is prohibitive. By 1926, they accept reality. The chateau is demolished. Bergdorf Goodman builds a luxury department store on the site. The retail palace replaces the residential one. Mrs. Astor's mansion at 65th Street holds out until 1926. Caroline Astor died in 1908. The house was maintained by her son for years, but he couldn't afford it after the war. The property taxes alone were crushing. The mansion is demolished. Temple Emmanuel, one of New York's most prominent synagogues, rises where the ballroom of the 400 once stood. At least this replacement has architectural ambition. The pace accelerates through the late 20s and 30s. The Mary Mason Jones Mansion. Gone. The Collis Huntington House. Demolished. The William Colford Schermerhorn Mansion. Razed. Each demolition is reported in the newspapers with a few paragraphs of nostalgic prose. Then everyone moves on. The city is too busy building its future to mourn its past. Some demolitions happen almost secretly. The families are embarrassed. They don't announce their intentions. The wrecking crew simply shows up one morning. Neighbors notice the scaffolding. Within weeks, another palace is gone. The speed is remarkable. Buildings that took years to construct disappear in months. The craftsmanship destroyed is irreplaceable. Hand-carved ceiling medallions are smashed. Gilded plasterwork is demolished. Floors made from rare imported woods are ripped up and burned. The wrecking crews don't care. They're paid by the day, not by respect for artistry. Their job is demolition, and they're efficient at it. A few architectural elements are saved by dealers and collectors. Mantels end up in other houses. Some woodwork is purchased by museums. but most of it is simply destroyed. The market for used mansion parts is limited, and the demolition schedule doesn't allow for careful deconstruction. Speed matters. The developer has financing costs accumulating daily. Every week of delay costs money. By 1940, most of the great Fifth Avenue mansions below 79th Street are gone. The avenue transforms into a commercial corridor, office buildings, apartment towers, retail palaces. The new architecture is taller, more efficient, more profitable. The replacement buildings house hundreds of families or thousands of workers. The mansions housed one family and their servants. The wrecking ball is democratic in a way the mansions never were. It treats all buildings equally. Historical significance means nothing. Architectural beauty is irrelevant. The only question is whether the structure generates adequate return on the land value. The mansions fail this test, so they fall, one after another, efficiently, profitably, inevitably. America eats its own monuments and builds something taller on the foundation. Henry Clay Frick dies in 1919. His will is explicit. The mansion at 70th Street and Fifth Avenue becomes a museum, not eventually, immediately. His widow can live there until her death, then it converts. No debate, no family squabbling, no option to sell. Frick watched the other mansions start to fall. He decided his would survive. The Frick collection opens to the public in 1935, after Ms. Frick's death. It works because Frick planned it from the beginning. The building was designed as a museum disguised as a home. The art collection is world-class. Vermeer, Rembrandt, Goya, Velázquez. Not just paintings bought for status, but genuine masterpieces selected by someone who understood art. The endowment is sufficient to maintain the property permanently. This is the exception. The success that proves how rare success is. Andrew Carnegie's mansion at 91st Street takes a different path. Carnegie dies in 1919. His widow Louise lives there until 1946. The family then donates the building to the Smithsonian Institution, which converts it into the Cooper Hewitt Museum of Design, another survivor. But notice the pattern. Both required extraordinary wealth, detailed planning, and legal structures that prevented heirs from selling. Most families lack this foresight or commitment. They want to preserve their mansions in theory. In practice, they need the money from selling. The choice between historical legacy and financial reality is no choice at all for people facing Depression-era losses and crushing tax bills. A few preservationists try to fight the demolitions. They form committees. They write letters to newspapers. They argue that these mansions represent important American architecture and should be protected. The developers and property owners respond with cold economic logic. Who will pay the maintenance costs? Who will cover the property taxes? Sentiment doesn't heat 100 rooms in winter. The city government shows no interest in preservation. New York in the 1920s and 30s is focused on growth, on being modern, on competing with other cities for business. Old mansions represent the past. The future is skyscrapers and commercial development. Blocking demolitions would reduce property values and tax revenue. That's politically unacceptable. There is no legal framework for protection anyway. The concept of landmark preservation doesn't exist yet in American law. If you own a building, you can demolish it. That's property rights. The idea that the public might have an interest in preserving private buildings is radical and mostly unthinkable. A few individual efforts emerge. The Architects Society tries to document the mansions photographically before they're demolished. They succeed partially. We have photographs of some interiors, exterior shots of most buildings, but the documentation is incomplete. Many mansions are demolished with almost no record beyond newspaper descriptions. The Museum of the City of New York collects some architectural fragments, a carved mantel here, a section of ornamental ironwork there. These pieces sit in storage, disconnected from their original context. Seeing a fireplace surround in a museum basement doesn't convey what the mansion felt like as a living space. Some wealthy individuals buy architectural elements for their own homes. A businessman purchases the entire oak-paneled library from one demolished mansion and reinstalls it in his Connecticut estate. These salvage operations save fragments but destroy the architectural integrity. A room means something different when it's part of a coordinated palace versus transplanted into an unrelated building. The fundamental problem is that Americans in this era don't value their own history. European cities preserve old buildings because they're hundreds of years old. American buildings from the 1880s are barely 50 years old by the 1930s. That doesn't seem old enough to matter. The culture prioritizes newness over preservation. By 1940, the preservationists have mostly given up. They saved 2 mansions through extraordinary circumstances. Everything else is gone or doomed. The battle was lost before it began because the weapons didn't exist. No landmark laws, no tax incentives for preservation, no cultural consensus that the past matters. Just market forces deciding that 40-year-old mansions are worth less than the holes they leave behind. The Sherry Netherland Hotel rises at 59th Street and 5th Avenue in 1927. 38 stories. Where the mansions spread horizontally across single lots, the new buildings go vertical. The economics are simple. One mansion housed one family. The Sherry Netherland has 400 rooms, generating revenue every single night. The return on investment is incomparable. Look at what replaced the Vanderbilt Chateau at 57th Street. Bergdorf Goodman opens there in 1928. The department store occupies the entire block, retail on the first floors, workrooms above. The building generates millions annually. The chateau generated nothing but expenses. The transformation is complete. Residential Fifth Avenue becomes commercial Fifth Avenue. Office towers multiply through the 1930s and 40s. The mansions came down during the Depression when construction slowed, but developers held the land waiting for recovery. When building resumed after World War II, Fifth Avenue filled with modernist office buildings, glass and steel replacing limestone and marble. The new architecture speaks a different language: efficiency, functionality, democracy of design. No ornament, no historical reference, just clean lines and maximum floor space. The 606 Fifth Avenue building goes up in 1957, where the William Vanderbilt Mansions once stood. 41 stories of aluminum and glass, designed by Carson and London. The style is international, could be built anywhere. No connection to New York history or character. The building houses corporate offices. Thousands of people work there daily. The site employed 80 servants when the mansion stood. Now it employs thousands, generating productive economic output. Apartment buildings claim some former mansion sites. These aren't ordinary apartments. They're luxury towers designed for wealthy residents who want the Fifth Avenue address without the mansion headaches. The buildings at 74th Street and 5th Avenue replace several Gilded Age houses. The new residents live in apartments with modern heating, modern plumbing, and building staff who handle maintenance. No need for personal servants. The building provides services collectively. The financial returns justify everything. A typical Fifth Avenue office building in the 1950s generates between $500,000 and $1 million annually in rental income. Property taxes take a portion, but the owner still profits substantially. Compare this to mansion economics. $100,000 in annual costs, zero income, the land appreciating but generating nothing. No rational investor would choose the mansion. The architecture changes fundamentally. The mansions were about individual expression, each one different, reflecting the owner's taste and the architect's vision. The replacement buildings follow formulas: maximum floor area ratios, setback requirements, economic optimization. The buildings look similar because they're solving the same mathematical problems: how to get the most rentable space on expensive land while satisfying zoning laws. Some replacements try for distinction. The Corning Glass Building at 56th Street uses experimental glass walls in 1959. The appearance is striking, but it's still fundamentally a commercial box. The innovation is in materials, not in the architectural ambition that drove the mansion builders. Retail continues expanding up the avenue. Tiffany & Company moves to 57th Street. High-end shops follow. The ground floors of new buildings command premium rents for retail. The upper floors become offices or luxury apartments. The mixing of uses is actually more urban than the residential mansions ever were. The avenue becomes a real street again, rather than a private enclave. The transformation benefits the city financially. The new buildings pay substantially more in property taxes. They employ more people. They contribute more to the urban economy. From a municipal perspective, replacing mansions with commercial buildings is purely positive. More tax revenue, more jobs, more economic activity. The city gets richer as the mansions fall. By 1960, Fifth Avenue below 96th Street is almost entirely commercial. The Mansion District is gone. In its place stands a corridor of towers, generating billions in economic activity annually. The replacement architecture lacks beauty, lacks individuality, lacks historical resonance, but it works economically in ways the mansions never did. The new Fifth Avenue is profitable. The old Fifth Avenue was beautiful. In America, that's not really a choice. Profitable wins every time. The street remakes itself in the image of capital, efficient and anonymous and thoroughly modern. Today, you can count the survivors on your fingers. The Frick Collection at 70th Street. The building looks exactly as Henry Clay Frick intended, though the interior has been modified for museum purposes. Visitors walk through rooms that once hosted private dinners and see Vermeers hanging where Frick saw them. The mansion survived because one man planned obsessively for its survival and died wealthy enough to enforce his will from the grave. The Cooper Hewitt at 91st Street. Andrew Carnegie's mansion, converted to the Smithsonian's Design Museum. The pipe organ is gone. The rooms are galleries now, but the structure stands. Carnegie's steel fortune and his widow's determination saved it. Not sentiment, planning, and money. The Jewish Museum occupies the Felix Warburg Mansion at 92nd Street. Warburg died in 1937. His widow donated the house to the Jewish Theological Seminary in 1944, and it became a museum in 1947. The French Gothic chateau survives because it found institutional purpose. Museums can afford what families cannot. The Ukrainian Institute of America at 79th Street. Originally built for Isaac Fletcher in 1989, later owned by Augustus Van Horn Stuyvesant. The building became the Institute in 1948. Another institutional conversion, another mansion saved by becoming something other than a home. The Neue Galerie at 86th Street. The William Starr Miller House, built in 1914. One of the last mansions constructed on Fifth Avenue. It became a museum of German and Austrian art in 2001. This one survived partly through luck, partly through late construction that meant it wasn't old enough to demolish during the main destruction wave. Perhaps a dozen others survive in various states, some subdivided into apartments, some serving as consulates or cultural centers. The Polish Consulate, the Italian Cultural Institute. These buildings persist because foreign governments need prestigious addresses and have budgets for maintenance. They're not really mansions anymore. They're office buildings dressed in historical clothing. Walk Fifth Avenue today, and you'll pass most of these survivors without recognizing them. They're dwarfed by the towers around them. The Frick looks small compared to the modern buildings on either side. Carnegie's mansion seems almost modest against the scale of contemporary construction. Context changes everything. The mansions were built to dominate their streetscape. Now they're architectural curiosities, preserved accidents in a landscape of intentional commerce. The preservation movement finally arrived in New York, but too late for most of the mansions. The Landmarks Preservation Commission was established in 1965 after the demolition of Penn Station shocked the city into action. By then, the Fifth Avenue mansions were already gone. The few survivors gained landmark protection, ensuring no future owner could demolish them. But protection came decades after it was needed. What do these survivors tell us? That American dynasties were illusions. The families who built these houses believed they were founding permanent aristocracies. 3 generations later, almost everything they built is rubble. The buildings that survived did so by becoming public institutions, museums, cultural centers, government offices. They survived by serving everyone instead of sheltering a single family. The irony is complete. The mansions were built to separate the wealthy from common people. The ones that survived did so by welcoming those common people inside. The Frick charges admission. Anyone with $22 can walk through rooms designed to exclude them. Carnegie's mansion belongs to the Smithsonian, which means it belongs to America. The architecture of exclusion survives only by becoming inclusive. This is what America does. It builds monuments to permanence, then destroys them within a lifetime. Not through war or revolution, but through property taxes, labor costs, and zoning laws. The most American revolution happens in municipal offices and demolition sites. The wrecking ball accomplished what guillotines could not. It eliminated an entire aristocratic landscape without a single political speech. The Fifth Avenue mansions fell because America decided wealth alone doesn't grant the right to occupy prime urban land unproductively. The market decided. The tax code decided. Democracy decided, expressed through economic mechanisms rather than political ones. If this story has made you reconsider what we value, what we preserve, and what we're so eager to erase, then click the like button and subscribe to the channel. The past never really disappears. It just gets buried under what we build next. And sometimes that tells us more about who we are than any mansion ever could.